The bear is already moving when the soldier raises the rifle. Not loping, not approaching, moving. The specific kind of movement that has only one end. A grizzly at full charge covers 100 yards in roughly 6 seconds. He has known this since his first week at Fort Wainwright, when the briefing sergeant said it with the flatness of a man who thinks about it in the dark. He knows it differently now. The brush crashes toward him before the animal takes shape in the undergrowth. The lever swings down and back. A round the size of his thumb seats into the chamber. That cartridge was designed in 1873. Not a replica, not a commemorative issue. The same cartridge, the same answer, from the same logic, to the same question that has confronted American riflemen for 153 years. The question is not how do you wound something, it is how do you stop something that will not stop on its own. Every modern innovation in military ammunition answered a different question. A question that mattered in Normandy, in Vietnam, in Fallujah. A question that means nothing to what is now 20 yards away and closing. The dark reason Americans have carried this round for a century and a half is not sentiment, it is physics. The United States military did not abandon the 4570 because it failed. It abandoned the cartridge because a more sophisticated philosophy produced better answers for the wars actually being fought. And that philosophy was correct in nearly every way that counted. By 1892, the Army had adopted the 30-40 Krag, lighter, flatter shooting, more accurate at the ranges where infantry combat happened. By 1906, the 30-06 Springfield, which carried American soldiers through 2 world wars and Korea. By 1954, the 7.62x51 had been selected as NATO's standard. By the mid-1960s, the U.S. military had adopted the 5.56 M16 system. Lighter still, faster still, eventually standardized across NATO by 1980. Each transition followed the same logic: lighter, faster, more rounds per soldier. The man who carried 100 rounds of 4570 was slow and heavy and could not sustain fire. The man who carried 300 rounds of 5.56 covered more ground faster and could be resupplied across chains that spanned oceans. The math was not subtle. There was also the matter of international law. The 1899 Hague Convention, specifically the Declaration on Expanding Bullets, restricted the use of rounds designed to expand or flatten easily in the human body. The effect, over time, was to push military ammunition toward full metal jacket designs for conventional warfare, a solid copper or steel envelope around the lead core, designed to pass through a target without deforming. Against human enemies, in human wars, across 4 continents and half a century of fighting, that round was the correct answer. The doctrine was validated in blood. The grizzly bear did not sign the Hague Convention. The problem did not announce itself as a policy failure. It arrived as a pattern. Incident reports from remote Alaskan operations, moving slowly through a chain of command that understood guns and wars and logistics, but had not been asked to solve this particular problem. The Second World War had put American forces into Alaska in numbers the territory had never accommodated. The Aleutian Campaign, the grinding, fog-soaked fight to take Attu and Kiska back from Japanese occupation between 1942 and 1943, sent soldiers into terrain that existed in no field manual. Volcanic rock fields, fog so dense it lasted for weeks, temperatures that killed equipment and motivation simultaneously. Many veterans and historians counted Attu among the most physically punishing campaigns of the Pacific War, a battle where weather was as lethal as the enemy. Those soldiers carried the best infantry weapons America had ever fielded. Those weapons were exactly right for the enemy they were built for. When the Cold War placed permanent American installations across the Alaskan interior, radar networks, airfields, signal outposts strung across wilderness that had no equivalent in the 48 states, the personnel manning them worked in the same terrain the Aleutian veterans had crossed. Brown bears, grizzlies, animals whose range overlapped completely with every survey team, maintenance detachment, and two-man relay crew the Army sent into the field. The incident reports began accumulating in the 1950s. Functional language, flat tone. An animal was encountered. Personnel engaged with available weapons. The animal did not respond as expected. Personnel were injured. Formal report follows. The 4570 government cartridge was adopted by the United States Army in 1873 for the Springfield trapdoor rifle. The men who designed it were not building a weapon for the wars of the 20th century. They were building a cartridge for a continent, for a landscape where a soldier or cavalryman might have one decisive opportunity before the situation moved past recovery. The Springfield Armory's answer was a 405-grain lead projectile in a case nearly 2¼ inches long, driven at roughly 1,350 feet per second. It was not designed to wound. It was designed to stop. What those numbers mean, not as specifications but as consequences, is this. That round carries approximately 1,600 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. But more important than the energy is the momentum. Momentum is mass multiplied by velocity. A 5.56 NATO round launches a 55-grain bullet at 3,200 feet per second. A 4570 round launches a 405-grain bullet at 1,350 feet per second. The 5.56 is more than twice as fast. The 4570's bullet outweighs 7 5.56 bullets combined. The momentum calculation is not close. The 4570 delivers roughly 3 times the momentum of the 5.56 on impact. And against a dense target structure built to absorb and deflect, that difference is what separates a blow that disrupts from one that merely penetrates. To a man standing in brush, the difference between a loaded lever action and a loaded M14 is measured in ounces. To a bear in full charge at 15 feet, that weight is the entire argument. A 405-grain projectile carries inertia that no lighter bullet can match, regardless of how fast it travels. The design that produced the slower, heavier bullet in 1873 was not a compromise. It was the answer to a specific question, and the men who built it understood exactly what the question was. Against the skull and musculature of a mature boar grizzly, a structure shaped by millions of years of bears fighting bears, built from dense bone, sloped dramatically forward to deflect and distribute impact rather than absorb it directly, high-velocity, small-caliber rounds do something specific. They penetrate. They damage. They create a wound that would kill any human target, that will eventually kill the bear. Eventually, at 15 feet in a 2-second window, is a word with no tactical meaning. A heavy 4570 projectile delivers the kind of impact energy that disrupts rather than merely channels. The blow a light, fast round cannot replicate regardless of its velocity. That distinction is the entire argument, and the Army had forgotten it for 70 years because it had built its cartridges for a different transaction entirely. And then, Alaska started sending reports. The discovery did not arrive as a single moment. It accumulated the way institutional knowledge does, in reports that landed on desks and got filed, in field personnel who returned from operations and described what had happened, in the slow, unglamorous accumulation of experience that eventually becomes doctrine, whether or not anyone writes it down. Military and government personnel operating in the Alaskan interior across the late 1950s and into the 1960s found the same thing, independently, across locations spread through the region. The cartridges that were correct for every human enemy America had faced were insufficient for this one. Not because the rifles were bad, because the target was different, and the difference was categorical. The modern military cartridge was designed for a human combatant. The grizzly bear is not a human combatant. No amount of optimization for one transfers to the other. The physics of a close-range bear encounter do not allow for measured assessment. The encounter is almost always in heavy cover, alderbrush thick enough to conceal an animal until it is within yards. The charge is sudden. The window between detection and contact is measured in single-digit seconds. In that window, a man does not choose his round based on muzzle velocity or procurement specifications. He chooses based on what stops the thing in front of him. That calculus had been worked out, independently, by every guide and game warden and government worker who had spent enough time in the Alaskan interior. The answer was always the same: heavy, slow, large bore. The answer that emerged was not invented, it was recovered. Large bore rifles and .45-70 government, weapons that had existed in Alaskan hunting culture going back to the territory's earliest American settlements, became the practical standard for anyone spending serious time in bear country. Field personnel made this choice before any formal protocol directed them to. Survey crews for federal agencies began carrying them alongside modern equipment. Guides running operations with military detachments specified them as bear guns. Government agencies working in the Alaskan interior built .45-70 rifles into their field protocols, not because a procurement board convened and reached a conclusion, but because men in the field had already settled the question and the agencies caught up. The men doing the work, not the men writing the manuals, had determined that the most modern military cartridges available were insufficient for a threat they encountered regularly. The answer they reached for was older than any weapon in the standard military inventory, not reluctantly, as the correct answer. In the same decade that American astronauts were training for lunar landings, the Mercury capsules, the Gemini program, the early preparations for Apollo, American soldiers and government workers in the Alaskan interior were requisitioning rifles built on designs from the era of Ulysses Grant. Not as collector's items, not as emergency backup, as the standing answer to the specific problem of close-range bear encounter. The rifles were old. The problem was older. The .45-70 cartridge had been in Alaska longer than Alaska had been a state, and the men who chose it were not looking backward. They were looking at what worked. A man in serious bear country with 2 rifles faces a question that clarifies everything. The modern battle rifle is accurate, fast-firing, loaded with ammunition that has won every infantry war America has fought since Korea. The old lever action, with its heavy, slow .45-70 round, stops the bear. He carries the lever action for bear duty and the modern rifle for everything else. No argument, no doctrine. Just the accumulated knowledge of everyone who has been in that situation before him, refined through experience into a settled fact. For this problem, on this ground, the old round works and the new one does not. The grizzly bear has no doctrine. It does not know that the 1899 Hague Convention pushed military ammunition toward full metal jacket designs, or that American procurement spent a century making its cartridges faster and lighter and more lethal against human anatomy. The bear knows what its biology requires. Charge in a straight line, at maximum speed, with 1,000 pounds of muscle and bone behind each stride. The skull of a mature boar grizzly has no equivalent in the target geometry of conventional warfare. Dense, sloped dramatically forward, reinforced by bone structure built across millions of years of intraspecific combat. This structure did not evolve to stop bullets. It evolved to stop other grizzlies. Against that structure, a full metal jacket round does what it was designed to do. It channels through, creating damage that will kill the animal. 3 seconds decides the encounter. 3 minutes decides what happens to the bear. These are different events, and only one of them matters to the man holding the rifle. A heavy .45-70 projectile delivers substantially more momentum on impact, and against a target built to deflect and distribute impact energy, momentum is what determines the immediate outcome. The disruption that follows a sufficient blow is not the gradual consequence of blood loss. It is the direct consequence of an impact the nervous system has no answer for. American riflemen in Alaskan wilderness learned this through experience that left no room for ambiguity. The Springfield Armory had encoded the same lesson in lead and brass 90 years before the first incident report was filed. The pattern runs deeper than one cartridge. The .45-70 remains in documented use today by military and government personnel operating in Alaskan wilderness. Survey teams, federal agency crews, units conducting field operations in serious bear country. They carry a cartridge designed before the electric light, alongside modern equipment and the full logistical apparatus of the 21st century. They coexist without contradiction, because the problem the old round was built to solve has not changed. The grizzly did not change. The physics did not change. The lesson encoded in 1873 that there are moments when nothing substitutes for mass and momentum, when the question is not efficiency, but termination of forward motion, did not change. Every modern cartridge was an improvement for the wars America has fought. For this one problem, the 1873 answer remains correct. The men who carry it today are not carrying it out of tradition. They are not carrying it from affection for the past. They carry it because someone read the reports, or walked in the brush long enough to reach the same conclusion, and understood that the question in front of them was not which round is more modern. It was which round solves the problem. That is a discipline that procurement cycles and technology transitions tend to erode. In Alaska, the grizzly has preserved it. A weapon endures for one reason. The thing it was built to stop is still there. American riflemen have carried this round for 150 years, not because the system failed to produce anything better. Better exists for different problems. For this one, the men who understand what they are actually preparing for have refused, without sentiment, to trust a lighter answer to a heavier problem. That is the accumulated judgment of men who knew the difference between the war the Doctrine expects and the problem standing in front of them. If you want more of those stories, the moments where the knowledge in the field outlasted the logic in the manual, where the men who refused to let go of an old tool turned out to have been right, subscribe. Because the history that explains why certain things endure is always stranger and more important than the history that only celebrates what replaced them.